Okay, let's get into it. How we doing? You fell for it again. How are you today? Doing okay? Good day? What was the highlight? Yeah, that's fine. Definitely feels more with all the decorations, Feels more full. Hey, tonight we're going to be in Psalm 63, one of my favorite Psalms. And I'm going to continue with my theme that I have titled Wisdom for Joshua. And my goal tonight is to hopefully encourage you, maybe give you a fresh perspective, maybe just challenge your thinking a little bit around what it means to seek the presence of God. Because that's what you get to do this year. And so as I was thinking about our time together, I thought that would be a good place to go for this evening. So Psalm 63 is where we'll be. I'll read it for you. It's a great psalm. It goes like this. You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you. In a dry and parched land where there is no water. I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory. Because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live, and in your name I will lift up my hands. I will be fully satisfied as with the richest of foods. With singing lips my mouth will praise you. On my bed I remember you. I think of you through the watches of the night. Because you are my help. I sing in the shadow of your wings. I cling to you. Your right hand upholds me. So God, tonight as we seek you, as we open up your word together, as we just begin to wrestle with this concept of your presence and how to seek it as followers of yours, as men and women, God, as humans who are made in your image, who are desperately seeking to draw close to you this year in Joshua, I pray, God, that you would speak to us from Psalm 63 tonight. We love you and we thank you for this time. Amen. Amen. Psalm 63 is a great psalm. 62 is awesome too, if you're looking for something fresh to read in your quiet time. Here's why I love Psalm 63. I love Psalm 63 because it's written from the perspective of someone who's in a desert. And I don't want to pretend to know and fully understand what each of you are going through, but I promise you that at some point you'll find yourself in a spiritual desert. You'll find yourself in a position where you're wondering where God is, why he is not answering your prayers. You may even question if he's listening to you. And Psalm 63 gives us a framework for how to handle that. And I also love Psalm 63 is one that is written by David. I love that it's written by David because David was known as a man after what? Yeah. This is one of those Psalms where we get to see that on display. This is one of those Psalms where we get to see the heart of David as he longs for and yearns for God. And so Psalm 63, verses 1 and 2. Psalm 63 starts, You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you. In a dry and parched land where there is no water. David is affirming in a world and in a time and in a place where you can worship anything, where you can worship anyone, he's going to choose to worship the one true God, the God who had been with him throughout all of this time. He uses primal human language to describe the feelings that he has towards God, the desire that he has towards him. He says, I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you. You can go some time without food. You can't go too long without water. David has God in his right place in his life because he equates him to something that is necessary for human survival, water. What's the thirstiest you've ever been? What's the most dehydrated you've ever been? I go on these hunting trips every other year with my father-in-law. It's a tradition that I got into when I married into the family. And I realized that some of you may not like that I hunt because the idea of killing an innocent animal sounds harsh. I eat it, don't worry. And I love that. I love eating animals that I kill. Nothing? Okay, cool. All right. No oohs, no ahs, no laughter? Okay. I feel like a monster now in your eyes. You're a monster. It's fun, though. It's usually 7 to 10 days in the wilderness, like kind of everything you need's on your back, sleeping in cots, drinking water from streams. Honestly, it's amazing. And one day we were going for a hike, and my father-in-law's that guy that when he's like, hey, we're gonna really put some miles in today, he means it. He means that. Like, he's not saying that as a euphemism. He's like trying to kill me. I'm pretty sure it was his goal to kill me on this day. In total, we hiked about 18 miles that day, which is just way too much for fat old Corey. Like, I have no business doing that, like, whatsoever. Keep me in camp, I'll be like the best camp chef you ever had. Don't make me hike 18 miles for no good reason. Well, we get up to the top of this mountain that had been burned the year before by fire, and so everything's just chalky and dusty, and there's ash, and it's dry, and I ran out of water because I'm an idiot. And didn't know that he was serious about how far we'd be hiking, but he was, turns out, pretty serious about how far we'd be hiking. And so I'm out of water, and we end up hiking a couple more miles past this point, and I'm getting to that point where, there's no self-service, the hospital's 10 hours away kind of thing, if you've ever been in any type of situation like this, where you just start running through the scenarios in your head, where you're like, all right, if I were to die, they'd have to carry me out, and that sucks for them, Okay, if I got a cramp, I do have some salt pack. Like, you're just kind of running through these different scenarios and situations in your head, and I'm starting to, freak myself out over my lack of water due to my poor planning when we come around this turn, and it was like God himself had just poked his finger into this mountain and created a hole. There's just water coming out of the side of the mountain, middle of nowhere. I take my backpack off, and I put my water bottle under it, and I sat there and drank this water like someone who had forgot water on a really long hike. And it was the best water I've ever had, still, to this day. Probably because I earned it, but also because it's just coming straight out of the earth, the way water's meant to be had. I share that story with you, which turns out none of you liked my story, but I shared it with you because that's the picture that I get of David as he is penning this psalm. He's not just like, oh, my mouth's kind of dry, can I have some water? No, he's saying, my whole being longs for you. My whole being longs for you. Someone asked the question in the grill this morning of how do you sustain or maintain your relationship with God over time? It was something to that effect, and my answer was, I have nothing else. There's nothing else. There's nothing else that you have. Like, if there's one thing I could deposit into your brain this week, it would be this. There's nothing else for you. There's nothing else for you. You may need to learn that on your own. Maybe some of you have to learn the hard way. Maybe some of you have questions. Maybe some of you have fears, uncertainty, doubts about God. I get it. And each of us has to arrive at this place on our own. That's why your faith is your faith. But I want you guys to understand this. There is nothing for you apart from Jesus. And so let's introduce that kind of truth that I just shared with you into the equation of having 9 months to focus solely and fully on your relationship with God. That has to begin to change the way that you go through your days at Joshua. Right? Like, if the chief end of Joshua for you as a Joshua student is just accomplishing the program and doing the things they say to do, you might as well go home and save the money. Truly. You're wasting your time. You want a cool experience living in a small community? Go move to a goat farm in Hawaii. Like, you can find this other places. But if your goal is to draw more near to the God of the universe, you're exactly where you should be. But they can't do that for you. You have to do that for you. And what David is beginning to articulate and express in Psalm 63 is that every fiber of his being is longing for the presence of God. I'm going to say something that I'll say a few times tonight, but I want you to know this. If you miss the presence of God, you've missed the entire point. If you miss his presence, you miss the point. I've spent a lot of years teaching the gospel in camp settings, and it's a privilege. But what's strange to me is there's always that moment where you share the gospel and Lord willing, kids get up and get saved. And I was one of those students that in my younger years, like it was just about not going to hell for me. That was my faith in God was largely based on a desire to not burn forever after I died, right? That's not the point of the Christian faith. The point of the Christian faith is not that Jesus saves you from the bad place so that you can go to the good place. The point of the Christian faith is that God, through sacrificing his son Jesus, has restored the ability for you to have a relationship with your maker and your creator, the very thing that was damaged and tarnished by sin because God is too good to dwell in the presence of sin. So when Jesus takes upon his shoulders the sins of the world, is crucified, offers up his last breath, 3 days later raises from the dead, essentially what he has done is he's opened the door for mankind to be in relationship with God again. You tracking with me? And so, if the point of your faith is that you get to go to heaven, I would argue you've missed the point of your faith. When Jesus comes down to earth in the beginning parts of the Gospel of Mark, he comes to earth saying, "Repent and believe, for the kingdom of heaven is here." Meaning, I'm here. Jesus is here, is what he's telling the people. And he invites them through repentance and belief, the same thing that John 3:16 says, the same thing that Romans chapter 10 verse 9 says. It's an invitation for us, yes, to have our sins taken away, and yes, to have the wrath of God removed and absolved from us as people, but more so, it's an invitation for you as a Joshua student to get to have a relationship with God. And so you pray the prayer, you enter into the relationship like we talked about last night. You deny yourself and you pick up your cross daily to follow Jesus. There's still something missing. Because what we have to begin to do now as followers of Jesus is we have to learn how to now cultivate a relationship with God now that I find myself in a relationship with him. Silly analogy, overused analogy, but think of a marriage. And maybe some of you come from a home like mine that parents didn't have a good marriage. And maybe some of you come from a home like my wife where parents had like the stinking best marriage. And it's like your goal to have that kind of marriage. There's a difference between knowing a lot about my wife. Like I could tell you, she's 5'2", shoe size 8.5, doesn't love gold, likes rose gold, blonde hair, not naturally. Don't tell her I said that. Sometimes she snores when she sleeps. Don't tell her I said that either. Pretty good cook. I think I wear that hat in the household, but she's got some hitters. You know, she's got some things that she can knock out of the park. The best mom I've ever seen, and the bar was low for me. I had mama drama growing up, but boy, is my wife just the most incredible mom. Loves our children so well, so intentional, caring with them, okay? You now know something about someone you've never met. Would you say you know my wife? No. Unless you stared at my cell phone this morning, you barely know what she looks like. Thanks for those pictures, by the way. Here's my point. You don't know my wife because I've told you things about her. You know about her, but you don't know her. I know her. And I know her better this year than I did last year and every year before that. Why? Because we have cultivated within the context of our marriage, something beautiful and relational and deep. The same thing is true of you and your relationships with God. The same thing is true. So you'll sit in classes in Joshua and you'll have people who are brilliant, highly intelligent, teach you things. You're going to follow curriculum that's carefully curated for people just like you to go through and to learn things. And if that doesn't draw you closer into a relationship with God, you're missing the point of all of this. So how do we How do we flip the switch from knowing about to knowing? Does that make sense? How do we take this and move it here? Verse 2. He says, I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory. Because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. What was David? What was he? Are you new here? No, you. I've never seen you before. Who is that guy? There's an imposter. Are you a visitor? What's your name? I'm Corey. Were you sick or something? Were you vaping in the woods, Josh? Busted. Did I meet you yesterday?
Hey, Josh, we remember you.
I'll never forget you. All right. David was a king. Where did kings live? Castle. Yeah, king in a castle. In a palace, right? Yeah. So what is a king in a desert? What is a king in a desert? What is a king removed from all of the pleasures and luxuries of the palace? What is a king without all the accoutrements that would be on the table at dinner, without his servants there? He's a normal person like you and I. He's just a person. It's David, right? So David, the king, is now removed from all of the comforts of his palace, all of the privilege, all of the power, all of the authority. He is just a guy in a desert. Here's how I would define spiritual deserts, by the way. Spiritual desert is a season of feeling isolated from God's presence. A season of feeling isolated from God's presence. Another way to say it would be spiritually lonely. Barna is this organization that does statistics for Christians and churches. Barna reported last year that 3 out of every 10 people is more lonely than they've ever been. And that number is up from 1 out of every 10. So 3 out of every 10 person is lonely. Raise your hand if this year in Joshua you have felt lonely. Don't be shy. Raise your hand really high. Look around the room. Look around the room. Ain't that something? Isn't that interesting? Isn't it interesting that you can live in such close proximity to other people and still feel lonely? I think lonely is one of the most human feelings that you can feel. Loneliness, by the way, is proof that we were made to have a relationship with God. Because even in a building where you're surrounded by 35 other people, it's never going to be enough. It's never going to be enough. There's something more that you're going to long for. There's something more that you're going to look for. So what can fill that void of loneliness? Only God can. Remember, it's all that you have. David goes on to say, because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. I will praise you for as long as I live, and in your name I will lift up my hands. David takes the longing that he has for God and he turns it into like a little worship song. He says, because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live, and in your name I will lift up my hands. David now is singing a worship song to God out of the overflow of the longing, the hunger, the thirst that he has for the place of God in his life. And then he says this, here's what happens. I will be fully satisfied as with the richest of foods. With singing lips, my mouth will praise you. Satisfaction can only come from the Lord, friend. You have to be honest about what it is that you desire. If you're not honest about what it is you desire, you're never going to get what it is that you desire, because you're always going to be longing for something else, right? So if you're longing for friendship, we use friendship as an example, we've talked about loneliness. You have to be honest about what type of friendship you're longing for. And then once you've been able to identify what type of friendship it is that you're longing for, you then have to be honest and say, is that type of friendship that I'm longing for, is that realistic? And would that satisfy the thing that I'm actually feeling? Are you tracking with me? And when you keep asking that why, the practice is called why 5 times. Why? What you're going to arrive at with most things in life, if not all, is that it's only God that can satisfy the whys in your life. David is affirming this truth in Psalm 63. David is saying, only then will I be fully satisfied as if I ate the richest of foods. Keep in mind, in the times of David, Like fatty foods were worth their weight in gold and then some. Because fat was very hard to come by. You're mostly eating vegetables that you farmed, maybe some beans, legumes, lentils, whatever. And so for you to be able to eat fat, it would be like the most satisfying thing you've ever had. It would satiate you, would be the word. So when David says, I will be fully satisfied as with the richest of foods, he's saying, finally, my hunger and my thirst will be satisfied. Finally. But who brings that satisfaction to him? God does. It's only God that can do that. Then in verse 6 it says this, on my bed I remember you. I think of you through the watches of the night. Because you are my help, I sing in the shadow of your wings. I cling to you, and your right hand upholds me. I love verse 6, by the way, because if I said this to any of you, you should probably report me, and I should never be invited back to Joshua. Like if I walked up to you and said, on my bed I remember you. I think of you through the watches of the night. You'd be like, you're a creep. Please leave now. We're done. I'm putting you in the fireplace, locking the screen, you know? So that place, that spot in your life is really just reserved for God and your spouse, right? Like that's an intimate place. That's a private place. That's a quiet place. That's a safe place. David says that in my most intimate place, in the inner chamber of the place where I am most vulnerable. Keep in mind, the king is never more vulnerable than when he's sleeping, okay? In the place where I'm most vulnerable, I remember you, God. Meaning this isn't just a show. This isn't just a front. I'm not just here because I know how to talk. I'm here because I believe every word that I'm teaching you this week. And out of the overflow of the love and intimacy that I have for God, I want to pour that into you as Joshua students because I believe in you, and I believe that this program has the power to transform your life if you allow it to. But you have to allow God into that inner part of your life as well. You have to allow God into those inner, most vulnerable, most private, most quiet places and chambers of your heart and of your mind if you would like to learn what it means to practice the presence of God and to grow intimate with Him. It's the only way. A few weeks ago, I work from home, and so I walked out of my office, and my youngest daughter and my son, which a little context, my youngest son is our last biological kid. My youngest daughter we adopted. And so just like to share with you a little bit of the dynamic there, they're both babies, right? Like my youngest son is the youngest child. He very much has that mentality. My youngest daughter is quite literally the youngest, and so she has that mentality. And so they don't always get along. You could tell them I said that. I think it would be fair. They already know that. But if you ever met them, you could tell them. I walked out of the office and upstairs to the little loft that we have, and they were in there, and they were building a blanket fort. And this thing was freaking dialed. It was really cool. I, as a parent, sometimes have to put out of my mind the fact that there's a giant mess and see for what it is. They made a really cool blanket fort. They had sheets strung up on the ceiling fan. They had like shoes holding blankets down. And my daughter goes, Dad, get in there. You got to see it. And I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. I'm not the most narrow person, you know. Like if we're at war, you're probably not going to fit me in a foxhole kind of guy, you know. And so I'm like, all right, I get in there, I wiggle myself in, you know, I get in there, I'm out of breath, and there's a little table in the inner part of this little blanket fort. And at the little table was a little chair with a book sitting on it. And I go, Maylee, what's this? And she goes, this is my secret place. And I said, tear it down, you're not allowed. I'm just kidding. I was like, that's amazing. Put this away and go to your room. No, I was like, that's it. That's what David's talking about. The quiet place, the secret place, the place that is reserved only for you and God, the place that whether you remain single or get married still only belongs to God. The secret place is the place where your insecurities, your vulnerabilities, the secret place is the spot where your fear and your uncertainty and doubt can be brought out into the light because God can handle it, because He knows, He sees, and He loves, and He still chooses to care for you. When David says, on my bed I remember you. I think of you through the watches of the night. I think it's just such a beautiful reminder for us to remember that's God's place in our life. There's this quote I want to read for you. Trying to remember where it is, though. Let me think. When did I use this quote? Oh, I used it here. Okay, so there's this book called The Celebration of Discipline. Do you have to read that book this year? You have to read that book. It's called The Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster.
Yes,
You do have to read it?
reading specific chapters.
Read the whole thing. It's a good book. Or read what they say. It's up to you. Whatever you want to do with your life is fine with me. But in that book, Richard Foster says that the desperate need today is not for a greater number of intelligent people or gifted people, but for deep people. For deep people. And the temptation for you who exists and lives and finds community in a version of Christian academia here at Joshua is to pursue knowledge, is to pursue wisdom, is to pursue understanding, is to memorize Philippians, is to excel at the classes. All of those, by the way, are fantastic goals to have. I'm not saying you shouldn't apply yourself in that way. I'm just saying that what also can happen amidst those pursuits and endeavors and in your desire to be successful in those ways, what also can happen is that you can grow deeper into your intimacy with Christ. You can grow deeper into your relationship with Jesus. You can grow deeper as you seek to draw near and love and in character and in transformation. As you, as a follower of Jesus, begin to seek God in these ways this year, you'll notice a depth in you. I tell my sons this all the time, because high school for a boy who was homeschooled until high school has been really tough for him. I say, buddy, you have nothing to prove, nothing to hide, and nobody to impress. When it comes to your relationships with God, you have nothing to prove, you have nothing to hide, and you have nobody to impress. Nothing to prove, nothing to hide, nobody to impress. And I hope that you believe that to be true. I hope that your view of God is not shaped by the shame that you feel, by the fear that you feel, by the uncertainty that you feel. I hope that your relationship with God is shaped by the fact that there is a God who breathes out all of life and creation as we know it and still chooses to love you. We have a God who knows you intimately, by name, before the foundations of the earth. We have a God who knows every hair on your head, every freckle on your nose, every grotesque thing you've done, every self-centered attempt at service that you've done. He knows the good, the bad, and the ugly, and guess what? He still offered up his son Jesus to be a sacrifice for you so that you could be in a relationship with him. You have nothing to prove, you have nothing to hide, and you have nobody to impress. And so when it comes to you taking those moments to have quiet time with God in the morning, what you're doing is effectively seeking the presence of God. Practicing the presence of God is something that each of us as followers of Jesus have to develop, and typically it takes a long period of time. It takes a long time. It is very much a discipline. And like most disciplines, they don't just happen overnight, they happen over long periods of behavior change and repetition. So what that means for you is, it may be worth you evaluating what your Devo time looks like here at Joshua. It may be worth evaluating the times of prayer that you enter into and journaling. It may be worth touching up and freshening up on what the spiritual disciplines actually are and making sure that you're engaging with those things. Does that make sense? Because what David is teaching us here is that there is nothing else in this world for him, and this is a guy who had everything by his world standards. What he's saying is that there's nothing else in this world that could satisfy. And David had a million avenues of satisfaction in his life. But David understood this at the end of the day. If we miss his presence, we miss the very point of all of this. And so for you as Joshua students, the hope really for tonight in this conversation was that each of you would begin to wrestle with and begin to think through what your devotional time looks like and what it looks like in throughout your day-to-day as you implement a rhythm for seeking God, okay? So here's what we'll do now. I'm just going to throw some random wisdom at you, and you take what you want and leave what you don't, okay? You have an hour for devotional time. During that hour of devotional time, it's important to have balance in that. By the way, I'm ending very practical, so we're going to kind of change gears a little bit here. Passages of Scripture are really helpful. What I find helpful is picking a book and sticking with it till I'm done. That's not always the case. Sometimes I'll do a reading plan if things feel dry or I have been undisciplined and I'm trying to get back into it. Reading plans, devotional books are great. If you want recommendations for those, I'd be more than happy to point you in the direction of a few. But the Gospels are a fantastic place to start, and follow the page breaks. Does that make sense? Follow the page breaks. So if you were to look at, let me just randomly turn somewhere. If you were to look at like Matthew 26, verse 36 to 46 is one chunk. I tend to follow those during my devotional time. And if it's straightforward or if it's an introduction, I'll go to the next section. So for example, for me right now, I'm in 1 Peter chapter 2, and I read just 8 verses in there this morning. And I sit on that. Once I have done the reading portion, I tend to close everything, and I just think about what I read. And if there's questions, thoughts, concerns that come to mind, I'll grab a pen and I'll write them down. And then I typically enter into some time of journaling, where I really am just writing out prayers. I'm very open. I'm very raw. I'm very honest in those prayers. I don't necessarily make or take the time to have eloquent speech in that. I'm just trying to get thoughts out on paper with a posture of prayer as I do so. I do that for 2 reasons. One, I want to be honest with God. I want to be vulnerable with God. Not that I want to treat him like cosmic Santa Claus and I jump on his lap and say, here's what I need today. But I want to train my soul to be honest in the presence of God. That's important for me. If somebody hurt me, I'll write it down. If I hurt somebody, I'll write it down. If I have a need, a want, a pain, I write those things down. Once I'm done with that, everything gets shut, and I'll literally sit in silence for the remainder of whatever time I've set aside. I know it's like custom to have worship music going. You obviously can't, but I know a lot of people like that. I think that there is such power and beauty in the spiritual discipline of silence that is so mostly lost in today's world. Like, one of the biggest gifts you guys have is you don't have all that noise that most of us have in our day-to-day. And so the ability to be silent is humongously important. It's something that you'll crave when you leave this place, because there's just going to be a lot of noise when you move on. So learn to crave the silence. You're following a time, so you want to honor that time. But man, if you have moments where there is no time, just see how long you can sit in silence. Is anyone terrified of silence? That was me for a long time. Why are you terrified of silence? Perfect. So here's what we want to do. We want to write those things down. Get it out. You know what I mean? I don't like being alone. And at your age, I really didn't like being alone. And so silence was like torture for me. Like, I was that kid that if you sent me to timeout, that was the perfect punishment. I have to be alone? I can't do anything? Like, oh, this is awful. If I try to send my oldest daughter into timeout, which she's almost too old now, she's like, great, this is perfect. This is like a dream come true for me. My wife jokes all the time. She's like, prison sounds so great. Like, just lock me in a cell with a book for a couple months. No one needs anything from me. I think she's kidding. I'm pretty sure she is. All that to say, silence is a beautiful spiritual practice for you to begin to implement here. The point is, when you go to the Lord in the morning, you always want to go to him honestly, and you want to always go to him with a heart that is anticipating and is hopeful to seek his presence. And like David said, I thirst for you as though I'm in a dry and parched land where there is no water. My whole being longs for you. That's the posture of quiet times in the life of a believer. That's the posture of how we seek God throughout our day. There are 1.5 million opportunities for you to seek the presence of God in your life throughout the day. The question is, are you opening that door and inviting him into it? No, there's no divide between sacred and secular as you're here in this program. Everything is sacred that you do. The chores are an act of worship. The preparing food is an act of worship. The making your bed in the morning is an act of worship. The way you interact with one another in your personal relationships is an act of worship. All of it is done as if unto the Lord. And so there's no divide between what is time where I'm seeking God and what is time where I'm not. There's no differentiation in that while you're here in this program. All of it is that. And so, friend, treat it that way. My whole being longs for you. If you can learn to cultivate a deep relationship with God, like Richard Foster says, if you can learn how to become a deep person this year, the rest of your days look so different compared to most people your age. Because what you've begun to start figuring out is what the majority of our world is still seeking. Who am I? What am I here for? And where do I go when I die? Well, like I said this morning, we have all of that answered for us. And God, whose name is Emmanuel, God with us, invites us to come and to be with him. He promises his presence every step of the way for us. Let me pray. God, thank you so much for these students. Thank you for their hearts, for their attentiveness. God, as we wrap up our time together tonight, I pray that you would give each of these students here a hunger and a thirst for you. God, would they be making the best use of the lack of distractions that they're experiencing? Would they be making the best use of this time where so much is spelled out for them? God, would it just be yielding fruit in their lives for years to come? Would it be benefiting them in ways that are transformative? God, in ways that are forming and shaping and molding them to be more and more and more like you, Jesus. We thank you that we can come to you whenever. We thank you that you're not scared off by our sin, that you're not repulsed by us. I just think of that picture of the prodigal son coming home after that whole mess he made. You're the God that paces the porch for us, that welcomes us home. Would you teach us to seek you in that way every morning, God? We love you so much. Amen. Amen.